Chapter 363, New Picture, Part 2-3. Translator, Strivon. Without a doubt, Mo Peng was talking about the recreation plan at the Frost River reality of Cloud City Water Village. This shameful gamer. He endlessly nagged Luo Nan, having heard that gaming in virtual reality promised no headway, not to mention the idea of beautiful women joining them. Luo Nan really didn't have the energy to argue with him. He could only stall. All the students have gone home for the weekend, who would specifically run to the large activity area for a meetup. That's true, then Monday. Oh, are you trying to get me to skip class? Mo Peng's expression gave off the heroic feeling of a squire risking his life for his lord, but underneath, it was the wretched action of passing the buck. Luo Nan simply headed to the living room. He used his uncle and aunt as an excuse to escape from Mo Peng's nagging. Mo Peng followed him. Next Monday, it's a plan. Luo Nan responded harshly without ill intent, but he was unable to stifle the bad thoughts in his mind. Any more nonsense, and I'll call over Zhang Yingying and have her fix you up proper. Breakfast barely passed, and Mo Peng wasn't one to stay idle. Aside from normally sleeping in, Mo Peng's weekends were rich with activity. He was the first to head out the door. Soon his aunt and uncle left. Of course, his aunt just had to lecture him. She even set up the AI housekeeper's operation mode. This made Luo Nan feel that he was infinitesimally close to being a mama's boy. Who was the one who said I'm a mama's boy? Oh, it was that useless Mo Peng. This sister and brother pair. Did God send them down just to torment me? Luo Nan rolled his eyes as he tidied up his bowl and chopsticks. He restrained his temper as he cleaned up the kitchen and dining room. At this time, the native species genetic and ecological preservation job had begun a new day. Peony led Inc. to meet with the Trigate Securities Action Team for the start of another meeting. Their plan for today was to study the Forest Wall District. Tomorrow's plan was to study the River Wu District. If everything went smoothly, Luo Nan would be able to slack off at this job for the next 2 days, spending this time and energy to mull over and experiment with the newest gains he had obtained. I'm finally back on the right track. Luo Nan let out a long breath of relief as he retrieved the 2 notebooks from the underground storeroom near the garage. He went straight back to his bedroom, determined not to leave for the rest of the day. In his bedroom, Luo Nan sat cross-legged on his bed. He flipped through the pages filled with countless insights within his notebook, the mere glance causing blood-boiling emotions. It was akin to fire being lit within a well filled with oil, causing the explosive sound of combustion to ring over and over. Luo Nan took in a deep breath, knowing that if he didn't control his emotions, it would be very hard to truly sink deep in thought. However, he had repressed his emotions for an entire night. He hated that he was unable to tackle these ideas while dreaming. It was easier said than done for him to suppress his emotions. Might as well let it flow instead of stifling it, Luo Nan muttered to himself. He drew back his lips into a smile, and his impassioned and surging soul strength was like a flood bursting a dam. It flowed every which way. The sky was sunny and cloudless outside the room, but gloom cast into the lake of his mind. The vast and hazy starry sky unfurled within Luo Nan's mind, covering a range of several dozen square kilometers. There were 1,000 households in the community, and the life sketches of thousands of living beings were reflected within. As the living starry sky manifested, the suppressed impulsive flames of his heart diffused throughout the starry sky. Soon, all heat had dispersed, leaving behind merely traces of the fluctuations of life, resonating with the stars that filled the entire sky. Luo Nan was unaware, but his heart and mind had become crystal clear. He was in a most limpid state. This wasn't his meditative state. It surpassed it. He felt the interference and resonance between himself and other living beings, and he automatically had a direction to begin with. He didn't get tangled up in anything. He simply stirred his thoughts, and the core vast star river, the visualization diagram, naturally appeared. This was the format pyramid structure, consisting of a tetrahedron, an inscribed sphere, and an outerscribed sphere. It matched with the thousands upon thousands of life sketches in the distance, converging together. The long river of starlight spread past the format pyramid, seemingly drowning completely. Clear levels were revealed within the format pyramid. They were regular and thorough, without a hint of disorder. Starting from the night at Frost River reality, Luo Nan's format pyramid had converged and fused with the life sketches into a star river. However, they were still independent. They moved according to their respective rules. Only where their domains clashed did the format pyramid clearly display its dominance. Yet this time, under the radiance of the long snaking river and myriad of stars, there seemed to be some subtle changes with the motionless yet majestic format pyramid. There has been a change, Luo Nan talked to himself. Under the countless lightning strikes of insight, Luo Nan's thought process had changed substantially. The foundation of his body and soul, the format pyramid, had to have corresponding changes as well. Only then could it prove its realness. The intent of his mind illuminated down from above, probing inside and outside the visualization diagram completely. What had once been a vague feeling transformed into a clear understanding. The previous format pyramid was a composition comprising geometric figures. It could be considered a conceptual expression. The current format pyramid was a set of figures with a lot more details, dots, lines, and faces joined together, revealing a conformation of light and shadow and giving off an even more marvelous sense of realism. Similar details continued to increase to the extent that it was a bit inappropriate to call the format pyramid a concise conceptual figure. After all, concepts were concepts. The corresponding idealized figure was far too rigid. The thought barely stirred, and the visualization diagram, which was already jam-packed with rich details, was like a sandcastle built upon the ocean shore. It collapsed just like that, scattering countless flowing silver-white rays into the void. Holy cow! Luo Nan's mind instinctively went tense, but before anxious emotions were able to boil up, the clairvoyance of his mind was crammed with thousands upon thousands of stars of varying luminosities. That's right. The conceptual composition of dots, lines, and faces had suddenly transformed into thousands upon thousands of stars. They unfurled, turning into a splendid constellation. The space between them formed a matching structure, and looking at the whole, Luo Nan could vaguely see the traces of rules outlining the tetrahedron, inscribed sphere, and outerscribed sphere. Luo Nan stared, stupefied for a while. His visualization diagram had transformed from conceptual geometric figures into a more real composition of stars and constellation structure. Wasn't this none other than a life sketch? This situation was very similar to the situation last night, when he used his clairvoyance on Driver Chin. Luo Nan wanted to bite his fingers. Emotions of bewilderment, stupefaction, and excitement entwined together. The self-constructed life sketch completely blasted apart the barrier of rules between the format pyramid and the living starry sky. It was like an exquisite, mathematical conversion. It took two independent domains and drew them under the same rules, further expanding the richness of the content within and increasing countless details that could be researched. Looking from this point, his attempts had truly started only recently. This was a breakthrough, and it invigorated his spirits. But from another perspective, the dissimulation and decomposition of the visualization diagram that accompanied him for many years had real impacts, forcing him to perform some mental constructions. All right, for instance, the constellations in the skies above never had rays of light connecting dots to form figures. It was the will of the people to imagine their outlines, reflecting the special cultures of humanity. It was the result of imagination turned concrete. Perhaps this principle could be used upon the format pyramid. Luo Nan suddenly became lost in thought as a certain question spawned out of nowhere. This question invaded his thought process. Grandfather's research in formatting theory back in the day. Was his objective an abstract concept, or was it a concrete phenomenon? Luo Nan chose the latter. It was impossible for a pure abstraction and its general symbol to develop with rich and meaningful content if it lacked a concrete, detailed, and accurate phenomenon as a support. Even if such an abstraction was able to develop, it would be that of sheer fantasy and daydreams. In other words, Luo Nan picked up the leather notebook and flipped to the title page. He looked straight at the concise lines of the figure, but what appeared before his eyes was clearly a profound and magnificent starry sky. Chapter 364, New Picture, Part 33. Translator, Strivon. Of course, the starry sky atop the title page was merely an illusion, but the changes within the format pyramid were real. Luo Nan felt restless sitting on his bed. He got up and walked around in a circle. An intense premonition came upon him. He studied formatting theory for over 5 years. Perhaps it was only now that he was able to truly touch upon the doorstep to the core research of his grandfather's work. What do I need to do next? What do I need to do next? Luo Nan's mind remained clear, for he had done arduous and crucial preparations to tackle today's juncture. However, he never expected to start up this smoothly. It was so smooth that it was out of control. After the Star Atlas transformation of the format pyramid, all his previous plans were completely invalidated. He needed to follow the new structure and sort out another rough train of thought. But the true problem didn't lie with the fact that his trains of thought were too few. Instead, there were far too many. He flung himself onto the bed, picking up his own loose-leaf notebook. He wrote and wrote, venting out his thoughts. Soon, 7 blank pages were crammed full of words, figures, and symbols, yet this was still not enough. Impulses of attempts jumped endlessly from his mind. Luo Nan never expected to have such a day bursting with insights. It was already 11 o'clock by the time he snapped back to reality from recording his insights. The AI housekeeper followed its programmed schedule and made lunch, inviting the only member of the household at home to eat at the dining table. Luo Nan spent an entire morning burning his mental energy. His energy consumption was out of the ordinary. An alarm went off within his instincts, and he simply brought the notebook downstairs as he prepared to use lunchtime to further mull over his thoughts and write. He wouldn't tarry at all. He shoveled a few spoonfuls of food in his mouth as his mind wandered, drawing and writing another half a page of words and symbols. Luo Nan felt all right with things. He could continue like this at the dining table. But a notification message reminded him of something at this moment. The lunch session has arrived. Shed some sweat, young man. The hexia vibrated, and Xue Lei's thick timbre laced with stifled laughter was exceptionally amused. This was a notification that they recorded a few days ago when they had the leisure. This was to ensure that Luo Nan exercised control over his daily schedule. Gym Master Xu's teachings were inherently very strict. Luo Nan had to pay the most attention to habit and tempo. He had to know good cultivation habits and an efficient tempo. This was the foundation to realizing results in martial arts. The requirements were high, particularly after Luo Nan succeeded with the heart lantern of the eye's orifice. This was unavoidable, perhaps due to his extremely special circumstances. Every day he had to do morning sessions, night sessions, and lunch sessions by the dot, not shaken even by thunder. He couldn't be lazy. Xue Lei was a good friend, and he acted as a serious and rigid supervisor. Having strictly controlled himself for over 10 years, supervising externally and pressing internally, Luo Nan had already formed an initial tempo for cultivation. However, his tempo became a bit messy because of his commitment to internal refinement, which yielded real results. He had yet to completely adapt to these changes. Luo Nan looked at the time and struggled mentally for a little while. In the end, he still closed his eyes, pushed his notebook aside, and ate faster. The benefits he just accessed with the mouth and tongue orifice displayed themselves at this moment. The digestive acids of the stomach displayed a clear increase in its energy conversion function. Luo Nan vaguely felt essence energy trickling down his throat, along with the tasteless and calorie-heavy nutritious meal. As Luo Nan ate, the essence endlessly circulated throughout his entire body, replenishing his own energy. The pace is extremely good, and the vital energy of the inner organs is stable. There isn't any clear imbalances. According to Gym Master Xiu, a thick root receptacle means a sturdy foundation, sufficient to bear. Luo Nan suddenly became aware of something. As he subconsciously ate his food, he had nearly jabbed his chopsticks into his nose. But he was also unable to deal with this sorry situation, as his thoughts continued to churn. Gym Master Xiu has helped control the progress of the body gear. Though it is weaker than the god gear, every step is solid. Planting thick roots into the soil of the body that is akin to a mountain is an absolutely decent process. In comparison, the god gear driven by formatting theory has been a road of wild and violent progress. The growth is uncontrollable, giving me a great deal of troubles. If a second explosive outbreak were to occur from the drive of insights, this little life of mine may no longer exist. His thoughts were clear. Luo Nan's back was drenched in sweat. He flipped through his notebook once more, completely crossing out some extreme and bold plans of his. He looked for some conservative and gradual plans, carefully mulling over them. That's right. When it comes to researching formatting theory, my current root receptacle isn't thick, my root nature isn't clear, and my root trigger is super early. I need to carefully sculpt and solidify my foundation before making any more plans. The way I express my thoughts when quick sketching is actually very suitable for this. Luo Nan smacked the table, making a firm resolution in his heart. He stuffed a few mouthfuls of food into his mouth, tidied up a bit, and went up the stairs to perform his noon session. He did a set of exercises, while his vital energy circulated within his inner organs, while his muscles, skin, and flesh trembled as he fixed himself in the proper stance. Luo Nan naturally seized a bit of calm. He easily shifted his attention to the living starry sky of his clairvoyance, beginning his afternoon research. Compared to the lightning strikes of insight in the morning with its series of bursting intensities, his mind was steady in the afternoon. His mental state was much more moderate, and he merely quietly observed the marvelous and splendid starry sky. Instead of viewing at the starry sky with the logic of formatting theory, he used the acuity of an artist. Luo Nan had been in the middle of a vicious battle fraught with dangers when he first mulled over the drawing method of the life sketches. He had been pressed, and time was of the essence, exhausting all the things he learned and experienced then. At the time, he had the experience of the out-of-body state, the pattern and tempo of soul breathing, and an understanding of a configuration for the operating structure of energy and information. With his many years of speed sketching as a foundation, having drawn thousands upon thousands of sketches, Luo Nan was able to utilize the keen ability to grasp the characteristics of people quickly and easily. He was quite proud to be able to integrate super complicated elements into such a grand and gigantic work of art. But from the harshest perspective, a rushed drawing and a meticulous work were far different at the competition level. In the end, the life sketch was merely a sketch. It was drawn through the method of speed sketching. It imitated the form and appearance, grasping a general impression. It was far from perfect in many details, such as in composition, scale, and structure. Needless to say, the current Luo Nan lacked in quite a bit. He didn't have the ability to endure, nor did he have the acuity, knowledge, and experience. But now, by learning arts from Gym Master Xiu, by continuing to cram the fundamental knowledge pertaining to the world, by putting coupling between the God gear and body gear into practice, Luo Nan had repaired one flaw after another. He was like a young artist with a modicum of success in art. He looked back on his own initial training drafts and was appalled by the sight. He knew where he was lacking, and he knew how to go about fixing them. There existed an overall order to the living starry sky, but the figures themselves were lacking in precision. The image was large, but of no real use. A basic mold was already formed with the starry sky, but there was practically no room to add detail. If Luo Nan wanted to amend the Star Atlas transformed format pyramid, Luo Nan would have to reify the Star Atlas. This was his direction. Luo Nan slowly adjusted his breathing, and the starry sky formed from the joining of life sketches was like a just completed composition. It was the draft of a structure recently drawn. It simply waited for Luo Nan to use his pen, go line the work with more exquisite layers of light and darkness, and make key details appear. Thousands upon thousands of amendments had to be made to the Star Atlas. It was an enormous undertaking without compare. Yet, it was the steadiest and most solid step Luo Nan could take. Of course, the first thing that had to be molded and revised was still Luo Nan himself. Chapter 365, Hidden Rules 1-3. Translator Strivon. Luo Nan wasn't in a hurry to start on the initial formulation of the direction, just as a standard artist was never pressed to put his pen to paper. This was especially true in his case, where he wasn't facing a blank sheet of paper, but rather a deep and complex starry sky. Luo Nan flipped through the loose-leaf notebook in his hands and found a blank page. He wrote solemnly with his pen, "The first item starts with me. Push myself, and others shall be pushed as well." Looking at his current circumstances, the simplest and smoothest option he had available when it came to truly revising the life sketches should lay with external clairvoyance. Driver Chin was an excellent example. With the degree of detail in Driver Chin's life sketch, The answer was simply placed before his eyes. But Luo Nan was fully aware that this wasn't enough. He lacked the link of a self-reference. It was extremely hard for him to see the flaws within his own work. The initial version of the life sketch had been affected by Luo Nan's level of understanding at the time. He nearly lost the space to add a further step in detail. There was a lesson to be learned from this. But something must be known. Observing the self through clairvoyance was what made cultivating difficult. That was what it meant to know one's own limitations. Gym Master Xiu had emphasized this to him last night using similar words, and Luo Nan had mentioned very early on that he was no expert in making self-portraits. He wasn't being modest. Of course, looking at the situation from a different perspective, high consumption often represented high gains. Though such a method of doing things promised great difficulty, it was a process with set standards and principles. Only when one polished themselves to become clear could they shine clearer upon others. This was the essence of the root receptacle, root nature, and root trigger technique of subdivision. Luo Nan chose a road where the beginning was rough, but the latter was easy. To get on this road, he would need to climb the steepest peaks. Only in this way could he solidify his foundation and avoid the fatal danger of the uncontrollable growth caused by formatting theory to the greatest degree. Luo Nan paused his pen for a moment before writing down more words. Second item, observe first, then replicate in multiple dimensions. Luo Nan was using drawing techniques to take a picture of the living starry sky. It didn't matter whether it was speed sketching or drawing. They both used techniques that weren't baseless or imaginary. They needed one to truly observe the subject. There was nothing much to say. Luo Nan's target of observation was none other than himself. This wasn't a simple tracing of his own reflection. Instead, it required him to study his body and soul frame in lucidity. Luo Nan needed to grasp its form, its soul, and match it with its star atlas transformed form. There existed all sorts of elements, many of which involved the mental plane. The number of ideas were numerous and chaotic. To accurately chase them down was no easy task. The only way to advance might be to look at the many different perspectives, the many different levels of the body gear and God gear, the visualization diagram, and the root receptacle, root nature, and root trigger, and then find the highest common factor among them. This undoubtedly would increase the amount of work Luo Nan had to do, but he already resigned himself to doing things the hard way, not the easy way. He had chosen the steepest path, so he didn't mind carrying a bit more burden. Luo Nan's mind remained slightly active with thoughts upon writing these 2 lines. The thoughts seemed clear, but they weren't. It was hard for them to fully form. Luo Nan just subconsciously spun his pen and used his other hand to lift yellow page after yellow page doused with sweat. His gaze streaked across his loose-leaf notebook, and he ran his eyes over the dozen or so pages of information filled with his insights. A moment later, he casually thumbed through his previous writing. This included a limited number of drawings. If he hadn't recorded his insights, the amount of meaningful content in his loose-leaf notebook would be small, though the notebook itself was thick. The most valuable thing within should be the 2 psychic drawings he made. One drawing was a bit small. It was the outline of the wraith sign he had drawn back at school a while back. It was quite abstract. The other drawing was now a tangled mess thanks to a highlighter, but the overall composition contained crucial details. It was much more concrete, containing rich symbolic meaning within. Yes, it was the prison sketch. Luo Nan had been confined to a detainment room on ship Lanshan. He had drawn this diagram under the catalysis of insight. From this, he was able to comprehend the mysteries behind the phrase, "My heart's a prison," and truly obtain supernatural powers. My heart's a prison. A jolt suddenly went through Luo Nan's mind. The obscure thoughts suddenly shone bright. Since I have to make revisions, how can I let these points escape me? He moved his pen on the spot, forming words on the same sheet of paper as before. Third item, scale the key links down. The three principles were arranged in order on paper, an expression of the scope shrinking in succession. After a substantial level was touched upon by the third principle, Luo Nan could start doing work. My Heart's a Prison played the special role of a nexus within the course of Luo Nan's research in formatting theory. If Luo Nan truly wanted to get started, it was quite appropriate for him to choose this node. Having gone through many impacts and experiences that honed him, the current Luo Nan bore a crystal-clear idea rising from the bottom of his heart. In essence, my heart's a prison, and formatting theory itself might be the manifestation of some kind of enforcing rule. As with the incident back at Frost River Reality, Luo Nan had sensed such things from the depths of the mental plane. It was an inconceivable order frame, internalized within the structure of his body and soul, ultimately achieving results. Following this recent period of time, when he learned techniques from Gym Master Xiu, Luo Nan found a suitable explanation in Oriental metaphysics. Unity of heaven and man. There were also similar words within classical scriptures of the Tao. For instance, man follows the earth follows the heavens follow the Tao, and the Tao follows nature. All right. He had to admit that there were far too many meanings from the words of Oriental metaphysics. There were often many different sorts of interpretations, requiring one to bite the words and chew the characters, nailing them down one by one. It was quite easy to be pulled down into the gutter by them. He just used this sort of image to casually draw the typical visualization diagram in his notebook. It was none other than the composition formed from a tetrahedron, an inscribed sphere, and an outerscribed sphere. Here, the inscribed sphere symbolized the self-format, the outerscribed sphere symbolized the heaven and earth format, and the tetrahedron in the center represented the societal format. Looking from a perspective of a pure cultivator, Luo Nan could put a temporary hold on the societal format. He needed to put more of his attention on the relationship between the self-format and the heaven and earth format. Of course, this topic itself was far too large. It was incompatible with his principle of scaling down. Luo Nan simply gave up this avenue, no longer sparing any additional thought to the overall frame. He just sculpted over the details. In other words, he gave up the logic topic of how to form the heaven and earth format and chose the next diverging path. That is, how can the self-format be used to reflect heaven and earth's creation? ... It seemed like this scale was still too large. Then Luo Nan could only continue downward in his selection. Luo Nan's mind grew clearer and clearer as he went down in level, and the basis of his selection grew more and more definite as well. He shouldn't even be thinking about fundamental theories and such matters. Right now, he had yet to reach the level of forming a theory to explain phenomena. Discovering the problem, observing the phenomenon, gathering data, then summarizing it all into a basic logic. This was everything he could do from now to the near future. If Luo Nan wanted to start from the basic phenomenon, there was one fact that was extremely clear. What was the most substantial benefit Luo Nan gained after comprehending my heart's a prison? A low, rattling cry rang out within the quiet bedroom. The answer was the dark chains. The inconceivable instantiation of this form had aided Luo Nan in going into the out-of-body state and had subdued a clone of the human-faced arachnid. It accumulated gains from every instance, seizing Luo Nan and placing him onto the fast lane for uncontrollable growth. Then why was there? Oh, Luo Nan gave up on the why. Right now, he simply wanted to know just what sort of form, just what sort of changes did the dark chains have after the Star Atlas transformation. Just what would be different if he pulled it out from the middle of the format pyramid. This was none other than his first work in observation. Chapter 366, Hidden Rules 2-3. Translator Strivon. The vibrating cry of the chains diffused throughout the mental plane, continuing endlessly. But as Luo Nan waited, the familiar dark chains faded away within the core of the living starry sky. A section flashed out of sight, giving Luo Nan no chance to view a concrete form. Tusk, has my previous efforts all gone to waste after the Star Atlas transformation? It was hard for Luo Nan to stop his imagination from running when facing an unexpected situation. He tried to use clairvoyance deep inside of the format pyramid Star Atlas, but the thought barely stirred when he seemed to see some sort of dissolved structure in the surroundings of the format pyramid. It's the outer scribed circle. This fuzzy outline of a sphere represented the heaven and earth format. It was akin to an inflated bubble, one that had expanded rapidly to its limits, only to pop and shatter. Stars flickered and died within to become part of the depths of the wider starry sky. Luo Nan wasn't clear on what this phenomenon represented. At the very least, his frame of body and soul, the God gear and the soul gear, had yet to have any bad reactions. Before the thought could even settle, another structural layer dissolved as well. It represented the tetrahedron. Its situation was quite similar to that of the outer scribed sphere. Its stars scattered and spread, noiselessly merging into the living starry sky. The two outer structures cast away and dissolved, becoming two dazzling waves of smoke. They branded the eyes for a moment before disappearing nearly without a trace in the blink of an eye. Luo Nan's scalp went numb. If this were to happen to the structure representative to the self-format, his mental defenses would crumble before anything would happen to the frame of body and soul. He feared what might come. While Luo Nan was dealing with an upheaval of emotions, the last remaining structure in the core region, the spherical Star Atlas silhouette, became like a morphed heart. It suddenly expanded and contracted along with his breathing and heartbeat. Again it expanded, and again it contracted. The expansion and contraction occurred 6 times in a row, nearly taking all of Luo Nan's attention and shifting it to this unusual motion. But it was merely almost. Luo Nan finally paid attention to the outline of the self-format. He looked at its expansion and contraction with wide eyes. It swelled greatly, but shrunk only slightly. It began to increase in size in this inconceivable manner. With a mere few cycles of this expansion and contraction, the spherical Star Atlas had already expanded to 4 times its original size. Yet its density didn't shrink because of this expansion. On the contrary, more and more stars could be seen at the core region, gradually forming a silver spherical cluster of stars. The form of the tetrahedron, the inscribed sphere, and the outer scribed sphere was history by now. The only thing left was the splendid and brilliant cluster of stars. It was akin to being within the real universe, the core of a galaxy formed from thousands of stars. It hasn't collapsed, that's good. Luo Nan was able to find joy within suffering. He was just about to observe the change in greater detail, when sounds of the chains rang again from within the splendid and brilliant cluster of stars. He had nearly forgotten about the chains, but it carried a special rhythm to its vibrations. It covered every corner of the scope of his perception. At the same time, an incorporeal yet boundless power accompanied the sound in its progression. It dispersed everywhere in the starry sky, warping the deep darkness in all directions. It caused the entire sky of stars, the thousands upon thousands of life sketches, to spiral around. Luo Nan was able to sense it clearly. There was a veiled set of rules carried by this incorporeal yet boundless power. The rules came out layer by layer, intruding into practically every single life sketch. A headache and vertigo was Luo Nan's first response. It was because the first to be impacted by these rules was the general order in all directions of basic space. The living starry sky distorted. What was far became near. What was near became far. What resided up above suddenly plummeted down below. Luo Nan's understanding was shattered to practically nothing. This could not continue on. If an artist were to have the concept of space, one of the most basic concepts in art, blurred, then his drawing would fundamentally no longer contain meaning. Luo Nan wished to restore the awareness of order. He sensed deep inside the living starry sky, using his interference ability and borrowing the material plane to anchor his position once more. The body gear and god gear were meshed and rotating for this end. The light of the eye's orifice formed a heart lantern, driving the flow of energy of the inner organs, while also casting its light toward the boundless starry sky of the mental plane. The subtleties were magnified as a result of his clairvoyance. The boundless river of space, the thousands upon thousands of constellations, they naturally conformed with the heart lantern of the eye's orifice. Yet each had their differences. Some were dark without light, some transformed to become especially eye-catching. But their darkness or brightness had nothing to do with the material space when it came to above and below, far and near. Things were even messier now. Like riding a tiger, it was already impossible for Luo Nan to get off this ride. He could only continue to use his clairvoyance. The heart lantern gave off a beam of sensing light, touching these glittering targets one after another. In an instant, the warped physical space no longer had any meaning when it came to distance. The heart lantern of the eye's orifice was like a beam of light descending from outside of space. It came from the mental plane and pierced into the solid world of reality. Darkness assaulted Luo Nan's senses, but they were pierced though in the blink of an eye. The barrier between the material plane and the mental plane appeared before Luo Nan in this moment, weak and powerless. The light and shadow of reality interweaved and combined under the illumination of the heart lantern, projecting a fuzzy shadow of a human. The image gradually grew clearer. Luo Nan was able to see a muscular and powerful black man. He was half naked, his upper body bare for all to see. The man sat cross-legged in a hidden room in stillness. The clear contours of his muscles trembled subtly, revealing that he wasn't as tranquil as he appeared on the surface. Luo Nan recognized this man. Black Tiger Baze, deputy head of the Knights of Equity in Xia City's Order of Justice. This man was a power ability user with the gift of a super-strong fleshly body. Back during the incident at Frost River Reality, this fellow had been in Weng's dauntless subordinate. He had been an enemy to Luo Nan's party, fighting a dazzling battle against the ears of truth Fairchild. But in the end, he became one of An Weng's offerings of sacrifice in order to release the might of the scales of truth. During the sacrifice, the exchange of the chaos element in Baze's body had caused a near-complete collapse of Baze's previous foundation. In the end, he was saved by the merciful Fairchild. Fairchild asked Luo Nan to grant a helping hand, and Luo Nan implemented an order frame, preserving Baze's life. Baze relied on Luo Nan's order frame in order to live. From this sense, Baze was the same as one of Luo Nan's believers. But Luo Nan reached the conclusion that he lacked the power to dominate this wild and untamable beast of a man. Luo Nan also lacked the interest to command Baze. There were many times when Luo Nan simply forgot about him. Luo Nan never thought his subconscious clairvoyance would settle upon this man. Based on Luo Nan's current acuity, knowledge, and experience, as well as the close relationship between the two, the heart lantern of the eye's orifice fell upon the quintessence of Baze. The bones and muscles were powerful, yet the internal body was weak. The inner organs were strong, yet the vital energy was scattered. Baze's original frame had collapsed to nothing. It was only by relying on the order bestowed upon him that Baze was able to live to this day. Baze was still in convalescence nowadays, even though he had the support of the order frame bestowed upon him by Luo Nan. Luo Nan knew only a smattering of knowledge back then. There were many vague spots in his information. The relevant amendments and adaptations were large undertakings. Luo Nan could feel Baze's hardships and impatience, but Baze was still as tenacious and callous as ever. Perhaps the focus of the heart lantern of the eye's orifice had fallen on Baze for too long, for Baze seemed to sense something. His eyelids trembled slightly before he soon opened his eyes. Luo Nan could see that Baze's thick lips were tilted up a little, carrying a bit of a sneer. It was unknown whom or what this was directed at. Baze lifted his arms in the next moment, raising his head toward the sky. He sat in this bizarre posture of devoutness, seemingly seeking to embrace a divinity within the empty air. He opened his mouth to reveal a rough voice. "Come then, bestow onto me rules, point me toward the path ahead, and I will repay you with valor and strength." Chapter 367, Hidden Rules 3/3. Translator Strivon. Oh, this untamable and wild fellow. Luo Nan would never go so far as to consider himself a god, let alone would he be bewildered to the point of being lost from a few words of offering from Baze. The radiance of the heart lantern of the eye's orifice pointed straight at Baze's essence, naturally applying the technique of subdivision Luo Nan just learned from Gym Master Xiu. Oh yeah, Fairchild had told him a few key circumstances last time they met. Luo Nan had formed a general judgment of Baze's character. This fellow would forever chase power, stopping at nothing. He only had his sights on power. He didn't care about being bound to any conditions, especially those from so-called gods, doctrines, and other illusory things. The root receptacle could be remolded, the root nature could be controlled, and the root trigger was appropriate. It looked like this was possible to do. Right now, Luo Nan lacked the most in his observation and verification. His thoughts churned once more, and the beam of light from the heart lantern of the eye's orifice fell downward, piercing the space between Baze's eyebrows. Luo Nan was startled in this instant, becoming terrified. Under the living starry sky, the cry of the chains grew clearer. The incorporeal, yet boundless power fused with the beam of light coming from the heart lantern of the eye's orifice. It ignored spatial distance and was non-discriminatory as it pierced inside Baze's body. The interference ability of the Heart Lantern was not worth mentioning in the face of a power B-rank ability user, but it carried that fantastical and warped power, and this power instantly displayed its effects upon Baze's body. Baze's reaction was great. His cheeks contorted as the muscles of his body spasmed violently. Yet throughout all this, Baze's lips remained spread open, revealing an ugly and unbridled smile. Bang! The hard bed beneath Baze split apart inexplicably, sending particles flying into the air. Baze stood up, his feet touching the ground. He staggered a bit, but he still maintained his posture with extended arms and a head held high. He was more like a mad believer than any other. Actually, this fellow was merely excited. The only thing he believed in was power, power that was his own. Baze's foundation had been eroded by the chaos element, and he was tormented over and over by the half-baked rules Luo Nan bestowed upon him. His life force was at its weakest. His inner organs, muscles, tendons, skin, and flesh possessed only form. Their functions were in disorder. But in this moment, the fantastical and warped power of the living starry sky came pouring in under the illumination of the heart lantern of the eye's orifice. The warped power of enforcement represented some sort of hidden, yet powerful rules of order. Baze didn't really lack anything, save for a force of order that could conform the chaotic functions of the human body. So, he rejoiced in the internalization of these rules, even when these rules were chains and fences that were hard to break free from. Anything was fine as long as he possessed power. For others, these rules of order represented a prison, but for Baze, it was the hardest backbone, the strongest framework. This was the foundation and insurance he chased after all this time. Baze staggered a few steps before standing steadily in place. His gaze was sinister, glowing with a faint green aura. He had been held back for over 20 days, and was akin to a hungry and vicious beast that wished to hunt in the wild jungle, with his hunting ground none other than the metropolis outside. In the next moment, Baze gave the metal door to the sealed room a hard kick. The door frame and the door were smashed out of the wall, flying outside. There were members of the Order of Justice who were responsible for taking care of him. They conveniently monitored him, but one by one, they became as dumbstruck as a wooden chicken. They saw Baze walk out with large strides and hands raised up high toward the ceiling. Perhaps it was toward a realm on an even higher level, but Baze yelled devoutly and madly, "I praise you." Baze was clearly very pleased with the incorporeal yet powerful rules of order. The power he was reacquainted with in this moment made him feel that the price he paid was well worth it. The Xia City Order of Justice was undoubtedly the weakest it had ever been these days. Baze regained much of his peak power after having his frame of body and soul remolded. Even First Oblatum Zheng Xiaro, who was temporarily in charge of administering education, didn't have the courage to stop Baze. He just allowed Baze to swagger away. Luo Nan felt that he did a bad thing. He watched Baze laugh heartily out the door and inexplicably felt a bit of a guilty conscience. Luo Nan shook his head, leaving a little telepathic intent to act in vigilance. Then he continued his journey of clairvoyance within the Heart Lantern. A weirdo such as Baze was merely an exception in the end. The light of day gradually dimmed. Xia City's world of night was rapidly restoring with vigor. In a dimly lit alley, a drunk woman was grumbling incomprehensible words. She even tore off her denim shorts to cover her forehead in an attempt to block the beam of light, invisible to the naked eye. This action was also an attempt to block the terrifying fetters that came with this light. Of course, her actions were useless. The drunk woman cursed loudly, and she dumped the contents of a bottle of alcohol she hid on her body upon her head. The alcohol ran down her hair, dripping onto her tender and soft shoulders. The liquid soaked her provocative, tight-fitting shirt. Such actions were unable to sober the woman, and the drunk woman stumbled out the alleyway. She bumped into a few smiling hoodlums, and the empty bottle of alcohol exploded to pieces upon the heads of this group of blind morons. Luo Nan smiled wryly, and the heart lantern changed focus once more. This time, the focus pivoted to a point over 100 kilometers away. It fell outside the main city district of Xia City. The beam of light from the heart lantern fell, and a wraith traveling through empty space suddenly stopped at precisely this time. Upon its body were dark chains pulling out from the greatest depths of the mental plane. The chains shattered, but incorporeal fetters and powerful pressure followed closely, making it instinctively shudder all the more. It didn't move for a time, no matter how much its handler spurred it. The heart lantern illuminated with its clairvoyance in waves. Luo Nan heard a hoarse call coming from ink, and ink flew up into the night sky, ignoring the curses of its agitated crow friends. Luo Nan even saw Zai Junping in some sort of religious venue. Zai Junping raised his head, looking all around at a loss. There was more. There was one more person. The slender figure lay silently upon a hospital bed. His eyelids moved slightly, but they didn't open in the end. Corresponding to this, a lone star, hidden for a long time, streaked across the living starry sky. It wound around half an orbit before fading away once more, and everything returned to tranquility. Luo Nan observed for a full cycle, the glow of the heart lantern growing all the brighter. The light reflected into his heart, causing Luo Nan to suddenly wake up with a realization. The living starry sky was being warped, but the order that appeared within this deformation was actually something he was very familiar with. He was even more familiar with this than the multiple interpretations of spatial order in modern physics. Luo Nan lowered his head to look at the loose-leaf notebook he held in his hands. Upon the page was a typical drawing of the visualization diagram he had just drawn. There was also the title page of his grandfather's notebook and its general outline of formatting theory. The structure consisting of a tetrahedron, an inscribed sphere, and an outerscribed sphere. If Luo Nan didn't have this intuitive and concise figure, and its corresponding theories placed ahead, Luo Nan would have probably been lost within the bizarre rules of the living starry sky. Yet right now his mind was very clear. The distortion of the living starry sky wasn't something new. Instead, he was the core. He drove the starry sky, and the starry sky was warped and divided into levels by him. The distance of the thousands upon thousands of life sketch weren't based on spatial distance, but on a foundation of usefulness toward him. They formed many levels, which could be named the following: student, office worker, clergy, politician. Yes, after transforming into a star atlas, the format pyramid intuitive structure had dissolved, but it seamlessly merged into the framework of the living starry sky. Its rules were no longer that of geometric shapes, appearing simple and intuitive through a high level of generalization. Instead, it was now hidden in the depths of the living starry sky, appearing in an objective and subtle form. The vast and grand living starry sky was on a mental level that stretched limitless. Though he was a young and clumsy student, Luo Nan was already able to obtain an answer when faced with this. Wait, hold up, let's not get in over our heads, let's just keep observing. Chapter 368, Disposing Milk, Part 1-3. Translator, Strivon. Luo Nan discovered once more that his train of thought had ran way too far. There was only one thing he must do in the very initial stages: observe the dark chains and nothing more. But then, something totally unexpected happened. A phaseless transformation occurred with this thing the moment Luo Nan made contact. It transformed into an incorporeal power and covered the living starry sky. It naturally extradited to the level of "my heart's a prison," where its range expanded largely in an instant. The connections were very complicated. A typical person would find it hard to partition and discover their applications. Look at the influence of the self-format on the living starry sky. How was it possible to distinguish them clearly from inside and out? At present, the core of the dense cluster of stars continued to maintain an outline of the self-format. It could match with the typical visualization diagram. As for the societal format, its tetrahedron form had become ancient history. This thing could be said to consist of the entire living starry sky. In any case, from the perspective of formatting theory, the societal format used the self as the core to form a societal structure that one could utilize for himself. There were no faults with this judgment, with the current state of the living, striving starry sky having suffered from a distorting strength. These two items consisted of everything Luo Nan had observed thus far. As such, there was no place for the heaven and earth format in his observations. It would be unavoidable for Luo Nan to harbor suspicions where he stubbornly insisted with his own ideas, with these circumstances before him, and with observing the dark chains. Luo Nan simply pondered things over. He could widen the focus of his observation target a bit. Luo Nan still remembered the teachings Master Xiu had imparted upon him half a month ago at the Daoguan. In a deep meditative state, he had seen the internal structure of the self-format. He just remembered the weaved chains, dense like a spider's web, mysterious and enigmatic. Wouldn't such an environment change with the dematerialization of the dark chains? With this thought just formed, Luo Nan feared further complications from arising. He hesitated no longer, the radiance of the heart lantern changing focus. This time, his telepathic intent smoothly penetrated within the dense cluster of stars, meeting thousands upon thousands of stars head-on. They radiated with an intensive brilliance. Luckily, such glaring light only radiated on the mental plane. The heart lantern of the eye's orifice flickered slightly, spontaneously adjusting the strength of its interference and changing the mode of coupling. The heart lantern took the impact of this wave of glaring light and reduced it to nothingness. Luo Nan once heard Master Xiu say, during inner observation, that the heart lantern of the eye's orifice acts as the head of the 9 orifices and 6 roots. After all, everyone was used to using the eyes for observation. People use the eyes to see images. This was what the mind was most accustomed to. This was especially true for Luo Nan, who grasped the marvels of the effects of coupling. Coupling produced an interference between the mental and material planes, akin to a glimmering wind. No matter how dark, remote, and indistinct the land was, all could be seen. Its information was also much richer than before when Luo Nan made contact. He felt the immersion when the information passed through and integrated with his consciousness. In this moment, Luo Nan felt as if he had collided with the center of a galaxy. It was as if he were enveloped by the dense cluster of radiating stars. They surrounded him in all directions, near and far. At the forefront of his telepathic intent, Luo Nan felt as if he had encountered an enormous black hole. It was desolate and dark, simply seeking to engulf his mind completely. This experience was different from that of his last deep meditative state. Luo Nan's mind sped straight into the depths of the black hole. The hot lantern of the eye's orifice pierced through the deep darkness, illuminating the deep space below. Oh man, this can't be a coincidence. Luo Nan was a bit surprised. The scene illuminated below largely matched up with the scene from his memories. The star atlas transformation of formatting theory had been a violent transformation, but the core area of the self-format actually had its basic structure maintained and unchanged. The core area manifested itself as a bottomless pit of deep space. The dark chains stretched endless here. They crossed and weaved, spiraled and entwined, forming a complicated and dense structure. Of course, the changes in detail were still very large. The last time Luo Nan's mind pressed into this area, the space seemed deep and dark. It was indistinctly silent, as if this place was a black prison built by a demonic god. All hope was bound and locked, for this place possessed a desolate and unwavering might. Back then, he had just barely gathered up the vital energy of his entire body for the purpose of feeding the flame of his soul located in this deep prison. But the energy had been consumed near completely by the giant net of chains. Only pitiful scraps remained, trickling down. So Gym Master Xiu had assessed that the art cannot be used upon his own body, and Gym Master Xiu even said that he took in external powers. This was what Gym Master Xiu meant by his words. However, the situation turned different after the passing of several days. Luo Nan had refined a foundation. He achieved success with the eye's orifice. He even comprehended the technique of coupling. The god gear and body gear meshed and rotating. The application of interference between the mental and material planes had deepened in layers. Luo Nan made progress with one item after another. His progress was clear and true. His progress was reflected here. He could see that the stability of this deep space seemed to be a little shaken. From time to time, subtle knockings were introduced within, leading the thousands upon thousands of chains to rattle. He examined carefully, noticing that there were some restructuring changes as well. If Luo Nan had to describe these changes, he would say that the star atlas transformation had affected this place. The deep black prison's luminosity and temperature had increased. It was difficult to describe the changes using different words. The hot lantern of the eye's orifice viewed internally, obtaining images. Luo Nan's mind didn't need to sink too deep. Separated by several layers of chains, Luo Nan could clearly see the aureola below. It carried a slight heat, which rose up like vapor. The heat closely entwined with the vital energy that would come passing in from time to time. A step further down, Luo Nan could see the flame of his soul radiate brightly within the net of chains. It was extremely lively, especially when the hot lantern's beam of light that was cast upon it. Their two energies merged, and the flame of his soul seemed to get excited. It exploded in detonation, the flame flaring high. It simply broke through the bottommost layer of the chain net, nearly burning through to the middle section. Luo Nan could vaguely see that half of the net of chains hung down from its rigorous and closely woven hole. Perhaps this was due to a chain being severed. It pressed low against the edge of the soul flame, subjected to an intense heat. Its form was warping. All right, this is great. Luo Nan already confirmed something. The star atlas transformation of the format pyramid was a reflection of the influence and application that formatting theory had toward the external. This meant that the black prison was a reflection of Luo Nan's level of control and manipulation over formatting theory. The previous him could only be described as a user of formatting theory. He was like a driver or a jailer. He had to strictly follow the set rules of formatting theory in order to use formatting theory. But his current circumstances were reflected clearly. No matter what changes were brought from the star atlas transformation of the format pyramid, the external power that was formatting theory was swaying in terms of its repression toward Luo Nan's core power. Luo Nan was gaining more and more autonomy, fixing the rules and actions. His progress was definite and unquestionable. Luo Nan couldn't help his mind from going wild in imagination. If the soul flame could cover the entire black prison and completely burn the thousands upon thousands of dark chains to ash, now what sort of situation would that be? Luo Nan let out a long breath, feeling like he had obtained great gains today. He put a halt to the internal clairvoyance for now, giving a successful conclusion to today's daytime closed-door cultivation. The time of day was already late. His uncle and aunt should be coming back home. It would be bad for Luo Nan to continue hanging out inside his room. He leaned back to lie on his bed. He stretched his body, warming up his muscles and bones and relieving the strain from sitting still for a long time. But just as his arm unfolded, a certain sensation collided into his mind. It made his body freeze on the spot. His soul's strength seemed to have grown again, explosively. Above the god gear, the water level of the vast ocean iceberg had been raised by a large section at an unknown time. The water was abundant and overflowing, its pressure heading outside. The external neuron, which acted as the core to bear this pressure, was trembling slightly. Chapter 369, Disposing Milk, Part 2-3. Translator, Strivon. What the hell? Luo Nan really jumped out of his bed, his head expanding by a factor in an instant. This didn't make any sense. He wasn't in an out-of-body state, he didn't sense the wraith sign make a hunt, nor had he done anything else. Fine, he had done quite a bit today. But how was what he had done related to the surge in soul strength? He immediately retrieved his mind and returned to a more tangible plane. He observed the coupled situation of the god gear and the body gear. The water level of the vast ocean iceberg continued to rise with no intention of stopping. Luo Nan had already jumped out of the mental plane, yet it wasn't the end. Could the "my heart's a prison" form be creating a vampire? Why, there it was, yet another why. Luo Nan composed his mind, putting aside these side problems. However, he grudgingly returned to the mental plane. He focused his mind, seeking the crux of the problem. The entire formatting theory system had already fused into the living starry sky. Luo Nan already knew the answer in advance. He understood how these powers worked. There were many things that came intuitive to him. The chains were no longer tangible, so the formatting theory system that covered the starry sky had become an incorporeal prison. Luo Nan had gotten rid of a single link in the chains, but the prison was simply one solid whole. Under the constraints of the invisible rules, the various life under the starry sky more or less affected Luo Nan. Most of their effective forces were subtle and minute, but as many little drops make an ocean, these forces naturally formed quite the scale. Luo Nan looked from this perspective and he suddenly had a hypothesis. He conjectured an idea, using the out-of-controlled growth of soul strength as the basis, and looking from the current status of the living starry sky, Luo Nan believed that a whole formatting theory system didn't merely consist of Luo Nan as a single-person model. Instead, the system was a vast structure that covered all living beings within the range of his senses. It resembled a planetary system. Luo Nan was the sun within the center of this celestial system, possessing an enormous mass and forming an attractive force. The sun attracted the other celestial bodies in the vast starry sky, and these bodies revolved around the sun in orbit. The few believers interacted with him on a deeper level. They were the planets, asteroids, and comets in the planetary system. The vast majority of the other people, however, held shallow roles. They were located far in the distance, enough that they couldn't be considered to be a part of this planetary system. Yet there existed an iota of a relationship to an extent. There wouldn't be much to say if this was merely a planetary system. However, there existed more links in how people affected each other. Using coupling theory to explain, the formatting theory system comprised several gears pieced together. These gears ranged all sizes, and they were located everywhere. Under the power of a strict system, the gears were undivided, as if one whole, forming an exquisite structure internally. Every level and every step, every set and every difference, they meshed together to form an exquisite transmission. These rivers of forces ultimately converged, gathering at the core of the formatting theory system. In other words, they collected upon Luo Nan's body. Luo Nan thought deeper. With more gears, with more sets of gears jointly operating, wouldn't it be like an enormous space-swapping machine? A production line, established to be the core, collected energy and materials from various levels. This could be treated as the foundation. The production line was producing more and more soul strength. The function of this production line was far too powerful. It was completely uncontrolled, and it continued to boundlessly produce. This would continue until a surplus in production capacity arose, causing an economic crisis. What Luo Nan was facing was none other than the dangers of a surplus. Was it good to have more soul strength? Of course it was good, but please first grant him a supernatural fleshly body so that he could completely digest and utilize this soul strength. A supernatural fleshly body was, of course, wishful thinking. Luo Nan didn't possess one, and this was equivalent to having insufficient purchasing power. He couldn't afford this soul strength, even if he really needed it. Even if Luo Nan gritted his teeth and took out a loan, the pressure from long-term interest would overwhelm him. There was an imbalance between production and consumption, so dangers naturally emerged. Having thought to this point, Luo Nan's brain began to go crazy. He couldn't prevent his imagination from running wild. He felt like a factory owner who was unable to find a market to sell his product to. He felt like a clumsy capitalist. Luo Nan had to get rid of these excess goods. If he could dump it away like pouring milk into a river or tossing it into an incinerator, he would gladly do it. The problem was, Luo Nan wasn't even able to find a channel capable of carrying this product. The external neuron's hollow depository had once been a deep lake. Today, it became completely filled. As for a furnace that could incinerate soul strength, he was forced to admit that such thoughts would be quite fanciful in imagination. Luo Nan began pacing around his bed, but he was unable to completely cast himself free from a wild imagination. Of course, he wasn't truly seeking to find an incinerator. Instead, he was following down the line of thought regarding the economic crisis. With his recently obtained knowledge of the basic concepts of mechanical design, Luo Nan was barely able to support an odd thought. He should intervene. In a situation with sufficient capital, an intelligent factory owner could totally change the function of the production line and produce new products. He could open new outlets, open new markets. A little more consumption was nothing to fear. Tusk, he had said that all he would do was observe. It looked like he was going to violate this once more. But this idea that popped out of nowhere was truly beautiful. Luo Nan couldn't help himself from expending the mental energy. He pondered some more. Actually, he didn't need to remodel the entire production line. He just needed to add one more link, and that link would take the product and continue the endless consumption. In refining life essence. This was Luo Nan's first thought. Gym Master Xiu had said that this sort of technique in refining essence to energy needed the participation of the mind. In turn, the technique tempered and refined the mind, raising its level. It was a sort of extraction and refinement process for soul strength. However, this task was a large one. This was particularly because of the maturity that was akin to jade forming purple smoke. The maturity was not quite there yet. If he were to endlessly refine from morning till night, Luo Nan's life essence would be burned dry quite early on, and he would descend into the flames of madness. Then what should Luo Nan burn? Luo Nan was affected by his wild imagination with incinerators. His thoughts concentrated on burning and refining. Then there was suddenly a bang. Luo Nan had kicked the bottom of the bed frame. He ignored the pain, taking his strength and venting it on the bed. Let's burn and refine the external neuron. The so-called reverse flow of energy occurred with the body gear leading and driving the soul gear, increasing the applications of interference. Luo Nan could totally maintain a consumption of soul strength this way. And looking at things from this perspective, the body gear was like fire, and the external neuron, with its hollow depository, could store a lake of crude oil rather than a lake of soul strength. If the flame were to be placed below, wouldn't everything be burned away? Wait! Only now did Luo Nan have the time to suck in a breath of pain and massage his toes. The pain gave him a sense of danger, and he was forced to admit that this idea was too ambitious. There was no actual phenomenon of this occurring. There was no data to support his idea. One bad move, and he would land in an irremediable situation. Let's talk about alternatives. First, he needed to do a few experiments and collect some data before making plans. After all, the external neuron wasn't a part of his body. Who knows just what sort of consequences would be produced after a long period of refinement. And so, a while passed, and the idea of remodeling the production line didn't fall into reality. It was more practical to go with disposing of milk. Now how to waste it, or consume it? Luo Nan scratched his head. His toes still ached a bit from pain. He sat back on his bed and subconsciously flipped through his notebook, seeking to find an insight that could resolve this problem. It was very unfortunate. Insight was a tricky thing. It never appeared in limited situations with far too many restrictions. In the end, it was hard for the power of his imagination to solve practical problems. Luo Nan flipped through the two notebooks and was unable to find a reasonable way to do it. Until he saw something from the corner of his eyes. He swept his gaze to something yellowish-green between the pages. Chapter 370, Disposing Milk, Part 3-3. Translator, Strivon. Luo Nan's fingers paused to reveal two yellowish-green pieces of paper pressed between the pages of the loose-leaf notebook. The paper appeared rough, but was surprisingly shiny. These were the paper talismans that Papercut had given him. They were of high quality, personally created by the rather famous psychic, Mr. Gao of the branch. Luo Nan used it to train in soul strength activation techniques and strengthen the applications of his interference ability. He had crafted small paper men last week at Ocean Sky Cloud City. It was a successful application of soul strength activation. This was originally a good method to dispose of milk. Back then, Luo Nan had relied on it to consume his excess soul strength and reduce the pressure upon his body. But after Luo Nan comprehended the technique of coupling, forming the frame of the god gear and body gear, his interference ability was no longer bottlenecked. He could reach 10 times the effect, consumption, and the like when compared to before from using just a bit of force. He could rest, but he had yet to abandon soul strength activation. He would always take the time to practice. Right now, just 2 paper talismans remained, but he had saved around 24 small paper men. These paper men were pressed between the 2 paper talismans. With a single breath of air, the tiny paper men fluttered into the sky, only to be scattered onto the bed and the floor. They turned alive like little monkeys the moment they touched solid ground. They seized Luo Nan's clothes and cuffs, striving to be the first to jump back onto him. Some simply crawled onto Luo Nan's shoulder, treating Luo Nan like Monkey Mountain. These were no paper men. These were clearly paper monkeys. Luo Nan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his shoulders, flinging the group of paper monkeys off. This was the heart of the ape technique Papercut had taught him, but it was far too lively. Luo Nan wanted to seek Papercut out later to learn the intent of the horse technique. This technique could do the same things as the paper horse talismans of fiction. They could carry heavy loads and travel with haste. They could soar across the lands. They were quite magical. Luo Nan's anxiety had eased a lot when he saw how lively the paper men were. He had been depressed by the occurrence of his symptoms over and over and had lost his calm. He thought once more. He had the coupling technique as a foundation. His situation wasn't as difficult and bad as it was in the beginning. What did it matter, even if his soul's strength had another explosive increase in growth? If opening the eye's orifice wasn't enough, then he would open the second orifice, the mouth and tongue orifice. If this still wasn't enough, then he would open the ear's orifice, life orifice, and the death orifice. Wouldn't he reach equilibrium after achieving success in the 6 roots of eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind? Luo Nan patted his cheeks and collected the paper monkeys. He stuffed them one by one between the pages of his notebook, taking the time to organize his thoughts. Finally, he contacted Papercut through the hexasphere. "Brother Papercut, is there a large move in soul strength activation?" "A large move?" Papercut was outside chatting with people in a tea house. He didn't immediately respond when he received this message. "A move that's very powerful and consumes a lot of energy. Can we use soul strength activation to bestow power in a charm or amulet, preparing for a big move in advance without worry?" Papercut heard Luo Nan's words and nearly choked. He apologized to the female friend opposite of him, stood up, and walked to an empty corner. He chuckled, "My boss Luo. If I possessed such a big move, then don't you believe that I would have broken through to B rank by now?" Luo Nan was a bit disappointed. "Then that means that you don't have one. Let's disregard whether or not I know of such a move for now. The problem lies in the limit to how much the paper talismans can sustain. Old Gao's paper talismans are of the best quality in all of Xia City. However, when the interference power reaches a certain degree, there is naturally nothing more to discuss. Therefore, activation classes on my level live a life in a supportive role. We rely on flexibility to live our day to day. Boss Luo, you have the strength to be more than this. You can transform yourself to the control class. You have this gift. Papercut had a very good temperament and personality. Even though Luo Nan had interrupted his date, Papercut was very patient. Not only did he explain to Luo Nan, he even offered a suggestion. I spoke of this with you before. The society has dedicated combat machinery. Though they may not compare to the deep blue walkers as a whole, their might is still considerable. With your realization and level in interference ability, and with you learning the subtle operations and mechanical theory from old Zhai, you can certainly create great stuff. Luo Nan went, oh. Papercut believed him to be emotionally stirred. Papercut also felt it was a bit unfortunate for Luo Nan to continue learning activation techniques. After all, Luo Nan was a talent, able to learn the psychic heart of the ape technique in such a short period of time. There was no one like Luo Nan in the entire Xia City. Very few people showed interest in becoming an activation class. The activation class would find themselves weaker, losing another up-and-coming youngster. However, Papercut maintained a bright and open mood from beginning to end. He smiled. Excellent. I picked up a flywheel arm a while ago. Though I haven't began sharpening it, it is still the most fundamental of combat machinery. If you want to get started, you can use it to experiment. I'll bring it to you when you have a free day. Okay, if you're not busy, Brother Papercut, we can meet next week on Monday. Although Luo Nan had spoken this way, he really didn't have much interest in shifting over to the control class. It was because this class would often cause him to think of deep blue walkers. But the way Papercut talked made it quite awkward for Luo Nan to refuse. Moreover, he didn't really want to possess a large move. He just wanted to find a channel to dispose of milk. That was all. Luo Nan was disappointed, and he prepared a few polite words to end the call. However, Papercut still listened to his circumstances with care. Headquarters has been quite honest recently. It seems like Deputy Secretary General Gong ate a big loss. He shut himself behind closed doors upon returning. Things have been fine. The branch is taking good care of me. Then you suddenly wishing to possess a large move. Oh, Mrs. Yuan, you're sorry, something suddenly came up. I need to go handle it. Let's chat later. Okay, later. Though she said they would chat later, the beautiful Mrs. Yuan didn't have the patience to hear his words. She didn't have the least bit of intent for later. She strutted out of the tea house and soon faded into the crowd of people. Can you believe the nerve of that woman? She specifically came over to have the last word. Papercut sighed, loosening his collar. He walked back to his original seat and leaned back, looking relaxed. A smile could be seen on his chubby face. Brother Papercut. Luo Nan was unable to see the circumstances on Papercut's end, but he was able to surmise that something unpeaceful had happened, and it was largely related to his call with Papercut. Am I disturbing you? It's nothing, it's nothing. The more good-looking the girl, the harder it is to coax her. Plus, I was harboring evil intentions because I think she's beautiful. Anyway, what were we talking about? Brother Papercut, since you're busy, we can talk on Monday in person. It's nothing. Waiter, give me another dessert. Papercut sounded quite relaxed, and he continued to chat with Luo Nan with all smiles. If you really feel guilty, then later you can introduce me to a female student from Acumen College. Has to be at least 20 years old. I fear becoming a beast if she's too young. Luo Nan stammered a few vague words. Even he was unclear on how to approach this. Papercut chewed on his dessert, his words muffled. Oh, right. We were talking about large moves. If you really want to possess a large move, then you don't need to seek it within the activation class. Open up your train of thought. There are many things that suit you in this world. For instance, you can focus on an honor-point mission over at headquarters. Its number is RT-8313. Perhaps it will be a pleasant surprise for you. Headquarters, Luo Nan instinctively felt on edge. Papercut understood, so he continued talking to assure Luo Nan, the mission is posted at headquarters, but fundamentally it's located in Xia City. You'll know once you see. The operation of the Hexia was a complete realization of telepathic control. As Luo Nan and Papercut talked, an intent flashed, and the interface switched to the official mission announcement board of the Wilderness Explorers Society. Luo Nan locked onto the relevant information. RT-8313, Information Gathering, Wu Zhao. Chapter 371, Dripping Sword, Part 1-3. Translator, Strivon. Luo Nan scratched his head within his bedroom. The post felt inexplicably familiar. Papercut chuckled mischievously in the tea house. Do you see it yet? Empress Wu posted it 3 years ago. Its details are to collect samples of soul strength and analyze its basic nature and principle of generation. Dang, that's a big topic, Luo Nan sighed. With the power of his imagination unleashed, he could only stay a respectful distance away from the essential questions of basic research. From this, he could see the foresight and spirit of an extraordinary. Oh, right, Her Majesty Empress Wu wasn't an extraordinary 3 years ago. However, Luo Nan was unable to understand how this was related to a large move. This is where the awesomeness of Her Majesty Empress Wu lies. She wants to collect data on the soul strength of all the ability users in the world. It's like gathering fingerprints, DNA, that sort of information. It's more or less a bit taboo. Though the reward in honor points is quite generous, there haven't been many people willing to take on the task since the beginning. Progress has been quite sluggish. Later, she thought of a method. Look at Attachment 2. It has information on the reward agreement for the data collection. Luo Nan didn't act in accordance to Papercut's intentions. The feeling of familiarity was growing stronger and stronger within him. He couldn't help thinking, where have I heard this before? His social circle was very small after all. He had very few choices. He soon smacked his thigh hard. Empress Wu's secret techniques, spreading the name of Wu throughout the land under the heavens. Papercut laughed. Aha, you know it too. Bamboo Pole must have taught you it. Yes, I have a rough understanding. Luo Nan had heard of this important event of the past from the notes on the major characters of the world course. It hadn't come to mind for a moment, because Her Majesty Empress Wu had far too many brilliant achievements, and Bamboo Pole was more biased toward describing people's personalities and temperaments. Although the impacts of the event were large, Bamboo Pole only spent a few minutes to explain them. The context and details were left as an extended school assignment. He let Luo Nan go do his own homework. Luo Nan didn't really touch upon this subject due to time constraints. He allowed the subject to pass by. He only knew the following about this world-shaking event. Her Majesty Empress Wu had displayed her incredible spirit. On the mission announcement board, she publicly taught a stunning attack technique, causing the entire world to instantly explode with shock. The study of contemporary supernatural powers was still in its early stages. Advanced research results had yet to be disseminated to the public then. Most of the world's ability users were still in an instinctive and ignorant state when it came to utilizing their abilities. Her Majesty Empress Wu seized these people's mentality and publicly released a master-level technique very suited for those on the awakened level. The temptation instantly smashed apart most people's mental defenses. For a time, cultivating the Empress Wu's secret techniques became common practice. Besides the awakened, the higher-level architects and even the extraordinaries practiced and studied it. From that moment on, Empress Wu's fame truly caught on in this world. Papercut helped fill Luo Nan in on the details. Before Her Majesty Empress Wu released the dripping sword secret technique, she paid a large price in building a special data collection network. She borrowed the wind of revolution and spent 2 years to gather valid samples from 40,000 ability users of various levels. She waited a year, then released a technique that is suited for those of the architect level B-rank ability users at the beginning of this year. The current number of valid samples haven't been counted up yet, but there should be a decent number. I'm guessing that there will be a couple hundred. The number was less, but looking at the number of B-rank ability users, the proportion was quite high. Today marks the 3rd year. Her Majesty Empress Wu has already advanced to become an extraordinary. We're all just guessing here. This year, or maybe next year, it is very likely that she will bring out an even higher level technique. On the extraordinary level, how imposing! Luo Nan was forced to admire Empress Wu. Yeah, these techniques have become staple goods since they were released on the network. However, it's always good to have some skills by one's side. The more Papercut thought, the more reasonable he felt. He pushed forward this suggestion even harder. Her Majesty Empress Wu's techniques are famous for being dependent on one's proficiency. The same dripping sword may allow one person to slaughter a ruffian like a dog, while another person may find it hard to kill a chicken. I have confidence in your control ability. Dripping sword. Luo Nan finally opened attachment 2. He looked at the name of the technique displayed and was lost in thought for a moment. How about you first learn and see? Her Majesty Empress Wu's techniques are more slanted toward the mental side. They don't require too much from the fleshly body. It's really suited for you. I've already learned the dripping sword. It is indeed out of the ordinary. At the very least, I've encountered some surprising results. Papercut sent over a document through the hexaware upon speaking. Her Majesty Empress Wu personally created the teaching materials for last year's intermediate-level training course. It has something to do with the dripping sword. It's described in great detail. There are even first-hand displays and demonstrations during the lecture. Only us of the Xia City branch can enjoy this treatment. Even a year later, the course material could be sold for nearly 10,000. It even contains some of my notes. It's fine if you take a look. After all, there are limits to my talent in this field. Thank you, Brother Papercut. Luo Nan knew these sorts of notes were kept in secret. Papercut was expressing his faith in Luo Nan by giving this to him. Papercut didn't mind. He said, "This is nothing. I've seen your recent progress. Secretary, he will rearrange your course schedule and this will be touched upon. This is just some special treatment arranged a bit earlier." Anyway, I also owe you for the matter with old Zhai. Worker Zhai. Old Zhai is a skilled person, but he's lacking in his gift for cultivation. He has always been just a step away from awakening, so some resources have always been unavailable to him. He is able to earn honor points by acting as your teacher. If he exchanges them for resources, his chances of success will increase sharply. It doesn't matter whether or not he succeeds. At least this gives him a bit of comfort. Luo Nan didn't agree with Papercut's words. You've described it wrong. Worker Zhai is tutoring me. He has taught me much. I still need to thank you, Brother Papercut, for finding me such a great teacher. Dang, I'm touched. Let's not be formal, bro. One of these days I'll call up Oid Zhai and we'll all have a good meal together. Of course. Luo Nan committed this to memory, and so Luo Nan would have 2 appointments with Papercut. This didn't really matter, except that he had to introduce him to a student. How annoying. Right when he was about to end the call, Luo Nan's mind became clear. He had very nearly forgotten his idea of disposing milk. He pondered over Papercut's description of the dripping sword. It didn't seem to consume a lot of energy, so he rushed to ask, "Are there any teaching materials for the B-rank technique?" The technique is to be used by architects. It's called the heart-searing blade. It's supposed to be very sharp, but I do not recommend that you touch upon it now. Papercut drank his cold cup of tea in a single gulp as he began to give Luo Nan an earnest lesson. Nanster. Though it's true that quite a few people view you as a powerful B-rank ability user, aren't there some minute differences in the end? How about you first look at the dripping sword? This technique is quite amazing. It highlights the defining characteristics of Her Majesty Empress Wu's techniques. Let's talk the next step, when you feel like you can freely use it, okay? I know, I just want to collect some material in advance. Although Luo Nan spoke this way, he felt guilty in his mind. Papercut hesitated, but in the end responded. There is a demonstration video of Her Majesty Empress Wu in Attachment 3. However, it's a lecture targeted for those of the architect level. People like us won't understand even if we listen. As for the teaching materials, the high-level discussion class this year really does contain these details. You can ask Secretary He for the relevant materials. The branch's database might even have video archives of this year. Chapter 372, Dripping Sword, Part 2-3. Translator, Strivon. Sister Yuhin. Luo Nan felt even more diffident now. He felt like he was biting off more than he could chew. Yuhin probably wouldn't support this. Papercut added, however, if it involves an individual's understanding, then it is best to find someone who attended the class at the time. Those who have been taught face-to-face are better. There are very few B-rank ability users from the branch, and even fewer of them are mentally slanted. Old Yu, Horned Demon, Old Gao, Mr. Baze. He stated a list of names. They sounded quite familiar to Luo Nan. Weren't these the few psychics of Xia City? Old Man Yu was one of the members of Xia City's Iron Triangle. The other 2 members were Aoyang Chen and Her Majesty Empress Wu. Horned Demon was said to be an adventurous madman. He had self-destructive tendencies. He spent day after day sloshing about in the wilderness looking for stimulation. Old Gao was the manufacturer of the paper talismans Luo Nan possessed. He was the successor of a line of Taoist priests. He was a half-disciple of Old Man Yu. As for Mr. Bai, Luo Nan was quite familiar with this man. He once fought side by side with Mr. Bai, and Mr. Bai had even examined and treated Luo Nan. Mr. Bai's daughter was Bai Xinyan. a mysterious doctor of medicine who held a strange position. Luo Nan suddenly realized that the psychics of Xia City were quite odd. There were 4 in total, not including Luo Nan, who could be considered half a fake copy of one. They might not rank high among the thousands of ability users, but they were all of the architect stage, powerful B-rank ability users. Were there only a few ability users above B-rank in the entirety of Xia City? 14 of these people were recorded within the 88 branches in the entire world. These 14 people were at the top of the list. Within this list, psychics occupied nearly a third. This was quite amazing. Luo Nan got a little lost in thought, but Papercut pulled him back to reality. I can help you ask old Gao. It's just that this fellow's a bit of a profiteer. It is very likely that he'll try to make a killing off you. Oh God, how much did you have to pay for that huge wad of paper talismans? Luo Nan suddenly felt that he should really find the chance to express his thanks to all his teachers who taught him his skills. Perhaps some alcohol would be good. Back to the topic. Luo Nan really didn't want to owe Papercut more favors. Luo Nan thought for a moment before saying, "Maybe I can seek out Mr. Bai. This old mister seemed to have a good temperament. He should be better to talk to than profiteer Mr. Gao, at least by a little. Right, you let yourself be treated by white salt for so long. It can be considered fate. He certainly cares for you, just don't mention." I know, Luo Nan understood tacitly. This family of father and daughter didn't get along well. This was not new. Wait, why does it sound like I'm the one who has to go asking around? Luo Nan gaped with his mouth, but he was speechless. This was his matter, so naturally he had to do it himself. But with his homebody personality, the pressure was enormous in actively contacting someone, let alone asking someone for help. Mr. Bai was his senior, after all, and he was one that he wasn't particularly familiar with. In any case, Luo Nan couldn't have Papercut act as his substitute for this matter. He had to grit his teeth and do it himself. At the same time, he suddenly thought of something. He only gained progress when he underwent his closed-door cultivation. His soul's strength always went out of control every time he made progress, and each time he had to spend a lot of mental energy to wipe his own butt. Was this worth it in the end? The next morning at breakfast, Mrs. Luo Shuking acted a bit odd. She felt that there was something a little off with Luo Nan. She couldn't but ask, "What are you tangled up in?" Oh, Luo Nan stuffed a large piece of meat into his mouth before raising his head. He donned an expression of innocence. "Your eyebrows are knotted up, and you're saying you're not in a tangle." Luo Nan just barely swallowed the piece of meat before continuing to play the fool. "Tangle? Oh, my frontal lobe and limbic lobe are really battling it out." At the end of the day, Mrs. Luo Shuking had quite the academic achievements in psychology. She circled around mentally and understood. In psychology, the frontal lobe of the cerebral cortex represented rationality and self-control. The limbic lobe represented impulsive emotions. Together, the two lobes could represent the struggle between long-term benefits and short-term benefits. Luo Nan spoke these words smoothly, using his quick wit. However, there were some real emotions contained within them. He didn't seek out Mr. Bai last night because he wasn't too familiar with him. It was too late at night. Luo Nan was scared that he would bother Mr. Bai's rest. Frankly speaking, his introverted homebody self had flared with anxiety, appearing as fear of interpersonal relationships and dragging him down. Instead, Luo Nan asked for a big favor from Secretary He. He learned that there was a recording of the high-level discussion course in the branch's database. However, he was unable to obtain it. Yuan told him quite honestly that he shouldn't bite off more than he could chew. The heart-searing blade was a B-rank technique, involving far too many elements. Many of these elements were unique to an architect's knowledge. It was bad to forcefully train without a firm foundation. In essence, Luo Nan couldn't even reach the criteria of an awakened due to the imbalance between his body and soul. This was a matter regarding criteria. It didn't change even though he possessed a superb combat ability. A missile that could explode at any moment was indeed more intimidating and deadlier than a refined rifle. But their degrees of control, where one could just aim and hit, lay completely opposite. Luo Nan even asked Yuan last night about disposal of milk. Oh, he didn't ask directly. He asked how to obtain a large move. However, the worsened state of the imbalance between his body and soul was seen through by Yuan in an instant. They went back and forth for a long while, and Luo Nan just barely avoided getting examined. That night, he wasn't able to cultivate and obtain any more progress. With things going this roughly, Luo Nan couldn't help being emotional. However, he had forgotten that his aunt was quite suspicious of everyone these days. She was worried that Luo Nan had gotten involved in some certain things. The vague words full of underlying meanings left Luo Nan's mouth, and Luo Shuking suddenly grew tense. That firm, did they come and try to recruit you again? Luo Nan mentally slapped himself in the face, cursing, "Me and my big fat mouth," to himself. He rushed to assure Luo Shuking, They haven't contacted me at all these past 2 days. They were just making small talk back then." Luo Nan didn't explain it well. The more he explained, the more suspicious Luo Shuking became. Luo Shuking put down her bowl and chopsticks, seeking to gain a deeper understanding of the situation. Mo Heihang had been swiping through the display on the table at this time, reading the news. He suddenly spoke up. "Actually, you can give it a try if there aren't any dangers to it. Youngsters should try and make mistakes. Only when one makes mistakes can they gather good information." He brought out his theory on trial and error once more, and this time he went a step further. You can totally go to someone's firm and give it a try. See if it suits your heart. Draft a contract if you want to do it, and bring it back to have your aunt help examine it. You're in high school right now. We can put financial affairs and independence on the agenda. Luo Shuking turned to glower at her husband, but she suddenly understood something and frowned. She didn't say anything. The number of people in a tangle had increased by 1. Clearly, his aunt wanted to get to the bottom of this. Luo Nan long knew what his aunt and uncle were worried about. He saw through the so-called trial and error with a single glance, and he couldn't avoid becoming depressed. He began to ponder, as he mentally groaned about how this was all a misunderstanding. To put these two guardians' minds at ease, should he go seek Zhang Yingying for help? Have her arrange a setting and perform a double act? Breakfast abruptly ended amidst this tangle and probing. Today was November 4 of the year 2096. It was a Sunday. The mistake of this early morning seemed to cause the schedule of the entire day to open up with a bad start. After breakfast, his uncle, aunt, and even his cousin all went out the door to do their own things. Luo Nan continued to park himself at home. He quickly observed the star atlas transformed format pyramid and was terrified by the continuous growth of the vast ocean iceberg's water level. Luo Nan gloomily left his meditative state, hugging his head in distress. All work pertaining to formatting theory could not be delved deeper into until he found a suitable channel for disposing milk. The subdivision technique of the root receptacle, root nature, and root trigger could not be considered as well, since they were too closely linked together. As for the internal refinement technique of the 9 orifices and 6 roots, Luo Nan had already reached maturity during his morning session. There was no need to overdo it like drawing legs on a snake. He was going to spend an entire day at home. He had to do a bit of something right. Luo Nan rolled on his bed for 2 circles. In the end, he had no other choice. He could only follow Papercut's suggestion. He opened up the mission announcement page for soul strength information gathering, and he flipped to the teaching materials of the dripping sword that Papercut had sent. He wanted to see if he could discover any pleasant surprises within. That's a wrap for this installment. Thank you all for watching and supporting Lord of the Stories. If you enjoyed this tale, please hit the like button, share it, and subscribe for more amazing stories. You can also explore other series updated daily in our playlists. Have a fantastic day and see you in the next episode.